From LPM,
Louisville Public Media.
I'm a Jew from Kentucky, that's what I am. The good Lord foresaw it with his infinite plan.
Welcome to the Bluegrass Schmooze. I'm Rabbi Ben Fried.
And I'm Rabbi Shani Abramowitz.
It's Nisan, and that means time for Pesach. You might know it as Passover. We'll learn all about it at the top of our show.
Then we'll schmooze with Yehuda Husband. He's an animator and theater artist, and he converted to Judaism as an adult.
We're going to talk with him about what it's like to be Jewish, and queer, and black, and a father, and even left-handed in Kentucky. It's all coming up on the Bluegrass Schmooze.
Forever a Jew with Kentucky, my home.
Welcome back. We are here in the month of Nisan. You've gotten through 2 months of Adar, and you've made it now to this next month, this very exciting month, because it has what is my personal favorite Jewish holiday. I don't know about you. But
It's up there.
It's up there.
Yeah.
It's a good one. My personal favorite Jewish holiday, Passover, in Hebrew, Pesach. And Passover is an amazing holiday, sometimes gets a bad rap because we're limited in what we can eat during the holiday, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But it has what I think is one of our greatest things in Judaism, which is the Passover Seder, this Passover festive feast that involves the telling of the story of our people's journey from slavery to liberation.
And one of the most important parts of the Seder, well, first it harkens back to what I think is the experiential side of Judaism, that we do lots of ritual things and retell our history, retell our stories in such a way that makes us feel closer to the actual event.
Yeah.
And we are commanded on Passover, on Pesach, to tell the story of the Exodus in such a way that each of us feels as if we left Egypt. And there are all these different components that go into preparing the Seder and telling that story over the course of the night, the 2 nights really, if you're in the diaspora, that contribute to helping us feel that we were actually there.
Yeah, the experience is crafted so brilliantly. Actually, I used to work at a Jewish summer camp, Tel Yehuda, for a number of years. And every year, the director of the camp would ask all of the head staff, he'd say, what's the greatest Jewish experiential education program ever created? And they, people would guess, oh, this one that we did at camp, or this one that, we did somewhere. And it was always wrong. It was the Seder. Because if you think about it, it starts with essential questions, that it's all about questions. It's all about education. It's about storytelling. It's about putting ourselves into this story. And then, like any really good experiential program, it has food. It has wine. It brings you in.
It has props.
It has props,
right.
Exactly. And so it's tactile. It engages all of your senses. And, one of the things that I think is really beautiful about it is it's also something that's really meant to be together in community and with family. They're even going back to the very first Seders in the land of Egypt, they were all together in their house with their family. And so for many Jews, even if they don't belong to a synagogue, even if they don't normally do a lot of things Jewish throughout the year, when Pew and other organizations do studies of what are the most done things in Judaism, there's always the top 3 are fasting on Yom Kippur, lighting Hanukkah candles, and having a Seder.
Yeah.
That this is one of the most important things because it's about gathering. It's about getting together. It's about being together as a family, eating great food, and really not only telling the story, but living this story together.
And one of the other sort of central commandments of Pesach is v'higata levincha, to tell it over to your children. And so what I always found, I think, very precious about Pesach, even if I didn't appreciate it as a kid, for all the years that our family gathered for Seder, I was sort of watching my parents and my grandparents teach us the story, and I was, without really knowing it, learning myself how to teach the story to, my children and, God willing, future generations. And so just by virtue of sitting around the Seder table, you develop these skills for teaching, and you become tethered to generations and your ancestors in a really beautiful way.
Yeah. So Shani and I did a lot of storytelling last month. We're not going to tell you the whole story of the Exodus from Egypt. You can go and look at the first few chapters of the book of Exodus, or depending on your time and attention span, you can watch what I think is the greatest movie about the Exodus, The Ten Commandments.
Hands down.
Oh,
I thought you were going to say something else.
Curveball. The Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston. Amazing. If you have 4 hours, totally worth your time. My family used to watch it every year during Passover, the same taped version that we'd taped from an ABC special that was showing it. I can remember the whole thing vividly, including the Velveeta commercials that would come up in between. But do you want to share what you believe to be the greatest?
I was going to say that what I think is the greatest Passover movie of all time is The Prince of Egypt.
It's a very strong second in my ranking.
It's an animated movie from DreamWorks, and it actually it's so loyal to the text. And that's in part due to one of our, beloved teachers from rabbinical school, Bert Vysotsky, who was actually the religion consultant on the movie and helped, the writers and the producers make sure that the story they were telling was as true as it could possibly be to the original biblical text. There's a lot of great music in The Prince of Egypt. And again, for anyone who's curious about the story, if you want to look at the first few chapters of Exodus, great. But either the Ten Commandments or The Prince of Egypt will also give you a pretty good sense of what it's all about.
If you want a very condensed version, you can also go to what my family would always watch when the kids would get bored, because the Seder is very long. We'll talk a little bit more about the Seder, but it's a very long feast with a lot of different parts. And at a certain age, you might have been a kid who was able to sit through the entire thing at your family's table, and kudos and good for you. My sisters and I were not, and a lot of the other kids who would come to my family's Seder. And so at a certain point, we'd get bored and we'd wander off and we'd leave. And so my parents would put on the Rugrats Passover special. And so that's also, if that's your vibe, if you're a 90s kid, always a great way to get the Passover story and just other good Passover information from Tommy Pickles and crew.
Let my babies go.
Let my babies go, exactly. So the Seder is this central thing. It comes from, in the book of Exodus, on the night of the 10th plague, when the angel of death was going to come and kill all of the Egyptian babies and pass over the house of the Israelites. Passover. In Hebrew, Pesach. Again, Pesach comes from that same root. The Israelites were instructed to gather in their homes and have this meal, and as you said, to tell this story, to pass it on to their children, with the idea that then this would happen every year, that it was like a ritual created in that moment, with the idea that it was something that would be passed on, and that God multiple times in the Torah instructs us to have this meal, to tell the story as though we were truly there, to answer our children's questions about it, that it really is laid out not the way we do it, but the core themes of it are all there right in the Torah. But then the Seder itself, the feast, was actually developed by rabbis probably in the last century BCE / the first century CE, and then was further developed by rabbis after that. And was built around asking questions and around telling the story. That the core component of the Seder is the telling the story of the Exodus, of putting ourselves into these shoes. Some Jews back then, and even some today, will literally wear sandals and have a walking stick in the corner to represent that we're ready to get up and leave Egypt together by the end of the night. And so we have this amazing Seder, which walks us through that. So. Shai, do you want to talk about what Seder means and how that plays into it?
Yeah. So the Hebrew word Seder actually means order, which again, pedagogically, I think is an excellent tool that we have, because we have almost a script for how to move through the evening, how to move through the Seder. And there are a couple different components to that. So like Ben, you said, there are lots of questions. You may be familiar with the 4 questions, which sort of ask the question of why is this night different from all other nights? What is so special about this holiday? How do we observe it in such a way that sets it apart? And again, brings us into the experience of the Exodus, both emotionally, but also pedagogically. We drink 4 cups of wine throughout the course of the evening, whenever we're partaking in a Jewish ritual, we always sanctify the moment over a cup of wine or grape juice with a special blessing. And we do that 4 times over the course of the evening. And then the bulk of the evening is spent in the section of the Seder called Magid, which means to tell the story, retelling. And we go through not only the history and the texts from Exodus, but also rabbinic interpretations of what happened at the Exodus, stories about how the early rabbis themselves observed Pesach and had a Passover Seder in those early years when they were still developing this ritual. And then, of course, we have a big festive meal. And if you've been listening to the schmooze for a while now and you've created a bingo card with all the different things that might come up in each episode, you probably have bingo now because in each episode we talk about a festive meal that is just part of all these different celebrations.
Festive meal is actually just the free space at the center of the Jewish holiday bingo card, because if there's a Jewish holiday, there is a festive meal. It's there. But yeah, and so throughout this telling and the questions are actually really interesting. Shani, you mentioned the 4 questions, and in the Talmud, which was compiled about 1,500 years ago, they talk about these 4 questions as like the questions of last resort. Like the break in case of emergency questions. That like if no one else is asking any questions at the Seder, at least someone will ask these 4 questions. So they've become a very central part, and it's tradition that the youngest attendee at the Seder who's able to ask them does so. So a lot of Jewish children have memories of like being told to stand on a chair or like stand up and like recite these questions in Hebrew. And there's a tune to them that you sing, and it's like this whole thing that you like practice very hard to be like ready to perform. But the rabbis at the time of the Talmud would like literally do things to make people ask questions so that they wouldn't have to ask the 4 questions. There's stories of like rabbis at a Seder, and they came in and the table like wasn't there, and one of them is like, "Why isn't the table here this year?" And the rabbi said, "Good, someone asked a question. Now we don't have to do the 4 questions." Or like another one where they like served dessert first, and they were like, "Why did you serve dessert first?" He's like, "Great, someone asked a question. Now we don't have to do those 4 questions." So if you are a child listening to this podcast and it's you are asking the 4 questions this year, make someone ask a question beforehand and then say, "Oh, guess I don't have to do it," and see how well that works on your parents, who are so excited to have you show off your Hebrew to all of your friends and family.
Hysterical. And I mean, we still do that in some form today.
Oh, yeah.
Having the matzah, the unleavened bread, which we'll talk about, on the table. My family used to always put out different, like, small toys that would symbolize the plagues.
Which is objectively very funny. We've made the 10 plagues into like,
which are horrible,
really,
and
really
violent
bad,
and tragic,
into like little jumping frogs and like sunglasses for darkness and all of these things. Yeah,
and we put those props.
For the record, I still do it. I just also recognize that it's very weird.
Yeah. We put those props on the table to prompt questions.
Yeah.
So we're sort of leaning into this rabbinic tradition, not necessarily to get out of asking the 4 questions, but to prompt curiosity. And
right, there's a Seder plate at the middle of the table that has ooh, let's see if I can do it. I made you name things in another episode. I cannot sing the items on the Seder plate. But there's an egg, there's parsley. I'll say and explain why there. So the egg represents newness, kind of this new birth. Passover is also, in addition to the holiday of redemption, is the Chag HaAviv, the holiday of the spring. So you have the egg and then also the parsley, which represents green, new growth. It doesn't have to be parsley. It just has to be a green vegetable.
But we did potato.
Oh, right. Yes. Sorry. In some traditions, especially. So again, we talked in Shvat that like in different places in the world, different parts of the year, different things are growing. So it's traditional to have a green vegetable on the Seder plate, but especially Jews from Northern Europe. So think like Northern Russia, Lithuania, Latvia, those areas would often have a potato because that's what was growing around Passover time. So egg, beitza, karpas. Then zroa, you have the shank bone of a lamb to represent the paschal offering, the sacrifice that would have been made in the temple. Then you have 2 kinds of bitter herbs. You have maror and chazeret. Usually maror is horseradish these days, which ironically is more spicy than bitter. But that's to remind us of the bitterness of the enslavement in Egypt. And then chazeret, a lot of people will use like a romaine lettuce or another sort of bitter herb or leafy green vegetable. And then the last thing is charoset. is this kind of like mortar-like paste that is meant to represent the mortar that our ancestors would have used as slaves in Egypt, but is really delicious. It's usually made with spices and apples and dates and figs, and it's kind of like all ground or food processed together. Every family has their own charoset recipe. Some of them are more paste-like. Some of them are more chunky. There's no such thing as a bad charoset in my mind. But that's the sixth item on the plate.
Great job.
Thank you. Thank
Excellent.
you.
For our next Passover episode, we'll compose a special song, and you
Yes.
can sing it next time.
That's always my specialty.
And then after we have a big festive meal, and then the way that we sort of round out the Seder is first doing Birkat Hamazon, grace after meals, after we eat, which is traditional in any context in which you're eating. And then we close out the night with Hallel, with psalms of praise, and we express our gratitude. And then we get to what's maybe the most fun part of the Seder, but it's all the way at the end, so it's hard to sometimes make it that late. Nirtza, which is when we sing a lot of really fun traditional Passover songs. I don't know, Ben, if you want to give us a little sampling.
Oh boy! Wow! Oh man!
I'm really not letting you.
You're really not letting.
hook.
You really want me to sing this episode? So there's a lot of really great Passover songs. I'll tell a short story about the one that I'll sing just a snippet of. So there's one song called Chad Gadya that's in Aramaic. We talked a lot about Aramaic on another episode, but it's the story of a goat that is purchased, and then the goat gets eaten by a cat, which gets eaten by a dog, and the stick beats the dog. And it's one of these stories that kind of just like goes and goes and goes.
It's sort of like the Jewish, there was an old lady who swallowed a fly story.
Exactly. And the rabbis say that, and like you're like, why on earth do we sing that at the end of the Passover Seder? It's because the rabbis say that the goat represents the Jewish people, and that all of these, each successive empire would conquer the next, but then at the very end of the story is God who comes and is shown to be the ruler of all. And so it kind of ends with a happy, I don't know how happy it is, but ends with God saving the day. So in our family, there are all these different characters, right? There's a cat, there's a dog, there's an ox, there's a butcher. So we have these little masks that you can wear, and so we pass those out, and everyone gets a part. And then when your part comes, you like stand up and make a noise. So like if it's the cat, you do like bah, or sorry, if it's the cat, you do meow. Wow, I'm gonna say we should edit that out, but then Laura's not gonna edit it out, and she's gonna leave it in for sure. Sorry, the goat would get up and go bah, the cat would go meow, and so on and so forth. So we were having a Seder, and we passed out the things, and my sister's friend was joining us for Seder, who she's not Jewish. And which is another thing about Seder is often, people will invite, non-Jewish friends to come and experience it. And at least in my family, we always had, friends who were not necessarily Jewish who would come and join. And her mom had been okay with her joining. My sister was in like early high school, like 9th or 10th grade. But she said she didn't want her daughter saying any of the prayers because like they were Christian. They didn't want to say Jewish prayers. Like, okay, fine, totally cool. But she that was just her one concern. So, we're doing this, and her daughter had been given the goat mass. So the goat comes up in every single verse and has to like get up and bat like at the end of every single repetition. And so we're doing it, and it's uproarious and it's fun, and we're making animal noises, and like all these things are happening. And like it ends with, Chad Gadya, Chad Gadya. There's your singing. And she stands up and she's banging really loudly. And then we turn and we see her mom just standing there, like aghast of like, these people are chanting in some strange language, and my daughter is banging like a goat. And like she just looked horrified. And like it was all okay, totally fine. Like, we explained, but just like the look on her face of like what on earth is going on here was just a truly amazing moment.
That's hilarious.
But yeah, so Chad Gadya is a great song. Do you have a favorite Nirtza song?
I think my favorite is Who Knows One.
Ah, it's a good one.
Where we go through numbers 1 through 12, and we go through
13?
13.
Yeah, Midaya, the 13 attributes.
Oh, of course. Okay.
Sorry.
Scratch that. Numbers 1 through 13. And we sort of enumerate different key things in Judaism that are symbolic of that number. So 1, of course, is God. 2 are the tablets that Moshe brought. 3 are the patriarchs, 4 are the matriarchs, and it goes on through the number 13. And you sort of, at this point, you've had 4 cups of wine. You're pretty tired. And it's similar with Chad Gadya, to sort of get through each stanza, and certainly to be able to sing the whole thing, it's like really hard.
Oh, yeah.
But it's fun because you sort of are watching the people around you like stumble over the words and fall over in their chair and, pace in the back of the dining room. And I think that's my favorite one.
Yeah. And one other thing that happens before the songs that I just want to mention is the searching for the afikomen.
Yes.
Which is, so towards the beginning of the Seder, we break a piece of matzah in half, and then one of those halves gets hidden. And there's kind of 2 traditions of how this works. Either the adult hides the piece of matzah from the children, or in some families, the kids actually steal the matzah and hide it from the adults. But the idea is that at the end of the Seder, you have to eat the afikomen before you can end the Seder. And so the kids, once they have found the matzah or having hidden it, have a lot of power. They have the thing that you need to finish the Seder. Right. So therefore, you have to ransom the challah from the kids. So afikomen. You have to ransom the afikomen from the kids. And so sometimes that is in the form of bribery of food or of gift cards or of, different things. One tradition that we do at our synagogue when we have our communal Seder is we have some money from my discretionary fund that the kids get to choose where they want to donate it. So we say that, you have the afikomen, we want it back. We're going to donate $100 or $180 to the charity of your choice. And they have to go and they have to sit and talk and think about, where they want that money to go. And then they come back and then we have that negotiation. They also get some candy. But yeah, so that's an important part of the Seder that happens right before all of the singing. Yeah,
I'm so glad you mentioned it. I'll share a funny afikomen story.
Please.
So we used to do Passover with my dad's side of the family. People have moved away and passed away, so we don't gather in quite the same way anymore, which is it's sad. But I have lots of uncles and cousins who would each hide their own afikomen. So there were always multiple afikomens that you could be searching for. And I found the afikomen of my dad's cousin, Ron, and the reward or the ransom was that I got to go to Toys R Us and I could pick anything I wanted.
Oh, boy.
And I was probably in 5th grade.
Way to go, Ron.
Yeah. Great gift. And the thing I chose, the whole toy store, I could have had anything, was a headset and a phone, like a hands-free phone. I was really into like office supplies and organization when I was a kid. And my cousin and his wife who took me shopping, they were like, we'll get it for you, but like really, like a phone? Like you're a kid. You don't even talk on the phone that much. Like, why do you want this? But I remember it was blue and purple tie-dye, and it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. And I just wanted to, I think, be like a grown-up. And I remember that phone to this day, and sort of wish I could, find it somewhere and start using it in my office. That'd be pretty cool.
If anyone's looking for gifts for Shani, blue and purple tie-dye phone headset.
Yeah.
That's the way to go. Key to her heart. So we've mentioned matzah a couple of times, but we haven't really explained exactly what it is. Matzah is unleavened bread. So leavening is when the bread rises, and so matzah is when the water and flour are mixed together very quickly and then cooked before it has a chance to rise. So what you end up with is just a very flat, cracker-like piece of bread. It tastes pretty much like cardboard. If you get the nice stuff, it's gourmet cardboard. But the matzah it's just these flat pieces of bread because it says in the Torah that for the whole week of Passover, we're not supposed to have any leavening. So for the whole week of Passover, Jews do not eat bread or anything that has flour or bread products in it that might have had a chance to rise. So matzah is kind of the ubiquitous food because it's the what's in place of bread. It doesn't mean that we just eat matzah all week. That'd be a really rough week for a lot of reasons. But it is the the bread that was in place of bread, because the reason that we do this is in the Torah, it tells us that they had to rush so quickly out of Egypt that they didn't have time to even let their bread rise. So they made these unleavened cakes. Now, these days, for matzah to be kosher matzah, it has to be like no more than 18 minutes from like the water touching the flour to it coming out of the oven. Did our ancestors really leave Egypt in 18 minutes? Probably not. Let's be honest. But that's the rule that has been mandated to make sure that there is no leavening. And because this is a really important commandment, there are Jews who we will, this is kind of the excuse for spring cleaning, that you clean your whole house to get any of the bread and any of the leavening out of there, to make sure that it's not in your house, it's not anywhere near you, that you are kosher for Passover, that you are ready to only have the things in your house. And at least in my house, we re-kosher. We like dip a lot of our utensils and our cooking things into boiling water to like make them kosher anew again, to like be ready for Passover. You know, we pour boiling water over our countertops to like make sure that they're totally cleaned off and kosher. That it's this really intense period in which, and to be fair, not all Jews do this in the exact same way. But many Jews do some sort of spring cleaning there to really get the chametz. Chametz is the word for leavening, away from their house.
And there's a ritual that we have at the very beginning of Pesach, of Passover, called bidikat chametz, which is the search for chametz, which Ben, you were talking about. And this is again another sort of pedagogical exercise in setting us up to be asking questions. And the way that we did it in my house is that we would, my dad would rip up a piece of bread and sort of scatter 10 pieces of bread all over the house. And at this point, you've already finished all your cleaning and all your preparation. And we would go around the house, and actually my brother and I would search for the bread. My parents would sort of like say, okay, go find the bread, go find the 10 pieces of bread. And we would turn off all the lights in the house and take a flashlight and be very diligent about trying to find this bread. And then I remember that my mom would sort of follow us around with the hose of the vacuum cleaner, because we'd already done very meticulous cleaning for Passover. And wherever my dad had put a little piece of bread, she would like vacuum real quick so there were no breadcrumbs left. Some people have the tradition to use a feather, actually, to sort of sweep away any crumbs that they might find. But again, it's another sort of hands-on experience that we have of the holiday.
Absolutely. And almost kind of like mirrors the afikomen searching, right? That like we start out with that searching, and then we finish the Seder with the afikomen searching. And so then, because we don't eat any leavening, that limits, kind of what you can eat. And so because of that, a lot of families have like special Passover foods that they only eat on Passover. So like one of them is a food called matzah brai, or fried matzah, depending on where in America you come from. That's kind of like a matzah French toast kind of a thing. That's like matzah with milk and egg, and then it's like fried in a pan. My family has a tradition of making these matzah popovers. The recipe comes from my great-great-grandmother, who would make them every year. And my grandmother tried one year to get the recipe from her, but because it was all like handfuls and pinches and things, so she would stop her every time she would do something and measure out what she was doing, and then let her continue. And so we make those every year. They're delicious with the chicken soup and matzo balls, but they're basically just a lot of eggs and butter, or eggs and margarine. But then they just poof up really big, even though they're not leavened, because they're made with matzah meal, which is just crushed up matzah. But so those are two of the ones that always stick out for me. I don't know if there are any special Passover foods that ring in your head or your belly.
Always have matzah pizza.
Ooh, yeah, it's a good one.
And I could eat matzah pizza all day, every day. And you make it just like a pizza. You take a piece of matzah, you spread tomato sauce, put cheese, whatever toppings you want. And I sometimes, during the rest of the year, get a craving for matzah pizza. And I have to say, no, that's a Pesach food, Shani. It's special for Pesach. And there's no problem halachically in terms of Jewish law with eating matzah during the rest of the year. But there is also something to be said for keeping those things sort of separate and distinct and keeping them in the Pesach realm.
Yeah. There is a period, full disclosure, I don't remember how long it is. There's a period right before Pesach when you're
Yes.
not supposed to eat matzah,
Yes.
so that it'll be a fresh and delicious
Right.
taste for you when you have it on Seder night.
But it's very tricky because you can't, it's past the point where you are allowed to eat chametz.
Right.
You know, you can't, there's a point before the holiday starts where you're no longer permitted to eat things that have leaven in them.
Got to get it out of your system.
Right, that wouldn't be considered kosher for Pesach, but at that same time, you also can't eat matzah. So I remember that time is always very stressful in terms of what you're able to eat and not.
Lots of potatoes.
Lots of potatoes. I mean, it's a matter of a few hours. It's not, days, but.
The one other thing that I just want to mention with what we can and can't eat on Passover is that there's this whole category of foods that are not flour, they're not leavening, and yet much of the Jewish world still doesn't eat them. But it's this really interesting divide between these two parts of the Jewish world that are really, really fascinating, where the category of foods is called kitniot, which broadly is legumes or seeds. So it covers everything from peanuts to soy to rice to mustard seeds. There's all sorts of things that fall into the category of kitniot that are corn is also one that are essentially things that would have been stored near the flour way back when. And so, or things that might accidentally look like flour if ground up. So it's essentially the rabbis have this idea of for things that are really important that they really don't want you to mess up on, they create what they call the gzera, or a fence around the law. So if the thing that you're really not supposed to do is thing X, and then if you do thing Y, you might accidentally then do thing X, they say, okay, so you're not allowed to do thing Y either. So they outlaw something that is not outlawed from the Torah, but that they add an additional prohibition to prevent you from accidentally doing something that would have been outlawed in the Torah, because it's a really big deal and they really don't want you to do that. And so you have all of these foods that also you don't eat during Passover. So in addition to bread and, anything with flour, many observant Jews also don't eat peanut butter or corn or rice or any of those things. Those fall into this category of kitniot. But that's only true for Jews of Ashkenazi descent. If you listened to our episode with Dr. Eli Capilouto, you heard a little bit about how his family came from Sfarad, from Spain, and Jews who come from Spain and North Africa and the Middle East have a different tradition than Jews of Ashkenazi descent, who are the Jews of Central and Eastern Europe. So Jews in Central and Eastern Europe do not eat these foods. Jews from Spain, Morocco, North Africa, and the Middle East do. So if you are going over to someone's house and during Passover, if their family comes from Eastern Europe originally, you probably won't find any rice or any corn. If you go to someone whose family comes from Iraq or Persia or Iran, they might have those foods because they're not allowed on Passover. So it's the biggest, I would say, gap in halacha, in Jewish law between those two communities.
I think so.
Most of it, they get along pretty well. It's all fair. Like there's issues of can you heat, water on Shabbat or not, or other small minutia things. But this is a big thing that actually really deeply affects people. Yeah. That is a huge gap between these two communities. And so you'll see foods that will have a symbol on them, a hechsher, a kosher symbol that will say kosher for Passover if you eat kitniot. Or others just say kosher for Passover. But if it has those kitniot in it, they make sure to let you know. So that if you're Ashkenazi, oh, this might be kosher for Passover for some people, but not for me.
Right. And actually, in my experience being in Israel for Pesach as a kid, but also when we were in rabbinical school, it was very hard to find items without kitniot in the grocery stores because so many Israelis have the custom to eat kitniot over Passover. And so if you're an Ashkenazi Jew who does not eat kitniot and you find yourself in Israel for Passover,
be careful.
You'd be careful, right? It might be a little bit harder to find some of the ingredients that you need. But I will say that in particular with mustard, food science, food technology has come such a long way that, there's imitation mustard that's kosher for Passover. It's disgusting. I mean, if you cook it in something, you can't really tell the difference. But it's true also with vinegar, which is in the category of chametz, which would be forbidden for everyone. But they have imitation vinegar, which also is really, really gross, but it's sort of made cooking and preparing for Passover a little bit easier. And we're lucky to live in a time when those things are easier to come by.
Absolutely. General rule of thumb for Passover foods, if it's an imitation of a food that's not allowed on Passover, it's probably not very good. So if you're like wondering, if you like get invited to a Seder and like, oh, should I bring like this thing that like says it's kosher for Passover and it looks like a thing you would have the rest of the year?
Just don't.
Just don't.
Just bring wine.
What you should do is either A, bring wine, make sure it's kosher for Passover wine, or there are special candies that only appear on Passover.
That's right.
Which are, they range from really gross to really delicious, and they're a matter of personal preference. So some of the greatest hits are there these like jelly rings that are covered in chocolate. Shani is making a face, but I really like them.
But I also know that like I'm grimacing right now, but like I'll eat them all on Passover. So.
Right. They're usually really good peppermint patties. Often chocolate lollipops are a really common one.
That
Those are
come
great.
in the shape of different plagues.
Yeah, they
often.
sometimes come in the shape of plagues, which again, very weird, but we roll with it. And then probably the most polarizing of the Passover foods, well, there's two. One is the macaroons, the coconut macaroons. I'm not a big macaroons guy. No, neither you. Then the other one is the fruit slices.
Oh, I'm obsessed with the fruit slices.
Yes.
Okay,
Thank
good.
you. Okay, wait. What's the best color?
The red.
No. Yes. Okay. Well, it's okay. You can have the reds. I'll take the greens. But they're these like jelly fruit slices covered in sugar.
Oh God, they're so gross.
They're so good. Like,
It's so good.
God only knows what is in them. I know it's not chametz. I know it's not leavening. But other than that, no idea. I don't want to know. But I love them. Again, and part of it is that like you only have them at Seder, right? Like you're never going to have those the rest of the year. So like whether or not they're good doesn't really matter. Because they're like this special treat for Passover. But yeah, so that's a little bit about Passover. There's more to talk about. We'll come back, for season 2 when we go even deeper into Passover. But it's been really great talking about it, and we'll be right back. Stay with us for a conversation with Yehuda Husband. This is the Bluegrass Schmooze.
Support for LPM podcasts comes from the Eye Care Institute and Butchertown Clinical Trials, where they strive for diversity, equity, and inclusion within their staff, patients, and clinical trial participants. To learn more, visit butchertown.clinic.
Welcome back to the Bluegrass Schmooze. Joining us now in the studio is Yehuda Husband.
Yehuda is an animator, actor, and Jewish theater maker based here in Louisville. Yehuda is the founder of the Shema Theater Group, a Jewish theater company affiliated with Congregation Adath Jeshurun. Yehuda is also the creator of the series Keeping Up with the Walkers, which was created through a grant from the National Institutes of Health to raise awareness around health issues endemic to the African American community, and to promote healthy living and positive attitudes toward preventative medical care. Yehuda is also the creator of the 2013 NAACP Image Award-winning film, Kasha and Zulu the King. Yehuda, welcome to the Schmooze.
Thank you. You guys did your research. Wow.
Your bio could have gone on another 10 paragraphs.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of the great challenges. We have such wonderful guests every time. And
Thank you.
so tell us a little bit about your Jewish background.
So I started observing Jewishly probably going on 20 years ago now. It was shortly after college and getting into my adult life. I grew up extremely evangelical Christian, my family, and I'm a survivor. No, I'm just kidding. But really to the point to where, and my father, who's also a Disney animator. He was also very much a lay minister type person. He and my mother were the ministers of our youth group at church growing up and all that. But when I grew up, I did not have the opportunity to make sort of choices about my faith and about what I believed. It was very much a very strict Christian evangelical household. Where when my father got home, the first word out of his mouth was not hello or how was your day? It was, did you read the Bible today? And so it was one of those things where, as a 14-year-old kid, I'm going door to door telling people if they don't repent, they're going to go to hell. And, would they like to come to our church? So it was very much so where I was, even involved in pulpit ministry and just really headed toward this trajectory of what was expected of me because of what was important to particularly my father. And so when I came of age, and I ended up going to Morehouse College for my undergraduate study, and because I was originally going to be a minister, and that's how I ended up at a non-art school that majoring in religion as opposed to going to an art school, to become an animator, which is what I really, really wanted to do. But felt that this pressure from the church community and from everyone, and so it wasn't until I got there and just really started actually studying theology formally that I really started to understand. I have some major issues with what I was taught and what I was indoctrinated with, and this is the way that I identify and what aligns with what I believe about God. Is more Jewish than Christian, and then so I had a bit of a time where I had used kind of like Messianic Judaism as a sort of a bridge, but that didn't feel right, and that didn't feel authentic to me as far as who I felt I was theologically and theistically, but I didn't have anyone to really sort of Juder me, so to speak. I had no connection to this whatsoever, and it was really funny because I just started. It was just sort of a thing in my heart where I was like, I'm searching. I was in this period of searching, and then I remember my boss. His name was Lou Hertz. He was a guy in Atlanta who's an animator, and he was Jewish. And I remember going to his funeral when he died, and it was after he was my current boss when he died, but he died, and I heard a cantor for the first time, and it was just life-changing to me. Like literally, I would say it was just life-changing to me. And I remember, like, it's just one of those things where my just soul cried out. Was like, this is, you're searching, but this is where home is for you. This is where you need to be. And so I started really searching and actively looking. And I remember I went to a synagogue in Atlanta. I won't say which one. I'm just out of, not trying to stir the pot. But I had a pretty bad experience as far as just like what I encountered when I went there. Especially as an outsider, you're always afraid to ruin someone else's worship experience, especially if and so I went, and this is no reflection of I have no idea, what the rabbi believes or thinks or how they are. This was from two congregants that were sitting in front of me when I went in. I was a nervous wreck. I'd never been ever in a synagogue in my life. My closest liturgical experience there would have been the graveside at Lou's funeral. And so I sat down and I was just like, I was like probably like flop sweating and just like really nervous, really just trying to blend in. And then I was also, I was the only black person in the building. Mm-hmm. And there's this woman and there's this guy in front of me, and the woman turned around and said, "What are you doing here?" And so and I was like, I panicked, and I was like, oh my gosh, have I offended? So I'm like, what am I doing? I didn't know anything. I wasn't wearing, I had a kippah on, but I did not have a tallis on, anything like that. And so I just said, well, I'm trying to worship, And so she goes, oh yeah. And she turned around and she leaned into him, and I heard her, and she said, religious tourists, And so I was just like, I just wanted to get out of there. Yeah. And so I waited till the very next time. It was kind of like, I kind of felt the same way when I was younger, and we would go visit like a Catholic church, and like, I don't know when to stand up, I don't know when to sit down, I don't know. I feel so othered in there, so foreign. So in this particular instance, the next time that everyone got up, I just left, and I just never went back in, right? So I literally the next day, like, I was like, okay, I can't do that. I can't go back. And I literally did not know anyone who was, I'm sure I knew Jews, but I didn't personally know anyone who could take me under their wing. And so it's like, this is what you should do, and this is the path that you could probably, go down. And so I bought a Judaism for Dummies book, one of those black and yellow ones. Yep. And I like read through it, and I was starting consuming stuff, and I literally just started I would observe Shabbat and say prayers on my own, like on Friday nights and things like that. But that was the extent of it, and just I learned the Moda'ani prayer, just different things that I just did and I didn't even know if I was saying it correctly. I knew nothing about, since then I've started studying Hebrew and then but back then, nothing. So I lived this way, this observance way. And I remember even there were some Jews at work, and they saw me with that book and they're like, what are you doing? What are you doing with that book? And again, it was kind of being made fun of why are you doing this? This is when I was working for Cartoon Network in Atlanta, after college. And so I ended up, quitting Cartoon Network to go do independent film work and like I said, keeping with the Walkers and just Caution the Zulu King for Viacom BET and all of that. And then we won the NAACP Image Award and I started doing some other indie stuff. But then I ended up coming up to Louisville for what I thought was going to be a very short-term project.
That's how we always get here in Kentucky.
To be honest, I was like, I'm going to be here for 8 months. I'm going to do the research on this animation project I'm doing. I'm going to, audition and record all the actors, and I'm going to go back home to Atlanta. That's what I'm going to do. And while I was here, this is my theater background, in the Music Man, I got my foot caught in the door. And so I met my husband, who would become my husband. But through him, he was really best friends with and grew up with this girl named Hannah. And they and Hannah was a member of Adath Jeshurun, and her family and Simon's family were not Jewish, and so he went with them, through high school and things like that. And so he was he was fully observant, and with the Ricuses, Robin and Sanford Ricus, they immediately took me in and made me feel so welcome and so like if this is what we'll give you the information, ask questions, what do you want to know, this kind of a thing. And they led me to a Melton class at AJ, where poor Deborah. I remember going to this class and sitting in because they had already started. And I was in tears at the end of it. And I went up to her and she was like, who's this guy, this grown man who's coming up to me and crying? I was like, I need to be in this class. It just made, it was just bonded with my soul. And that path is what led me to full conversion after, kind of fumbling around and trying to do the DIY version of Judaism for 10 years. And then so that was, back in 2017. And it's been I definitely feel when people say, welcome to the tribe and you're finally home and all that, I do feel like this is just what I was always meant to be is Jewish. And out of my how I identify, I definitely identify as Jewish before even identifying as Black or African American. Not because I can ever change what I am as far as ethnically or racially, but just as far as the most important thing in my life is my relationship with God and my identity as a Jew. And so that's such a strong part in raising my daughter Jewishly, and all of that. So it's one of those things where I'm definitely the caricature of the person who converts and is super involved and super observant and all of that. But it definitely is something that is so important to me, and so it informs everything that I do. So obviously even with Shema Theater Group, everything that we do, we do a lot of the plays that I write, and so I've written a number of plays. Both the plays that we did last year, I wrote. And I always deal with usually all the areas of my intersection. So that there's always probably somebody who's queer in it. There's always somebody who's Black in it. There's just somebody in it who's and it all revolves around Judaism in one way or another. But it's just so, and I'm involved with the Alliance for Jewish Theater, the national international organization, and so that's been my journey and where I was, and I often people ask me I don't feel like I changed God, so to speak. I feel like I understand God differently, and so I feel like I still love God so much, and it's not like I feel like. I just feel like I didn't really understand God when I was growing up, and I was given a version of God that didn't quite gel with me, and I was unable to really understand. So I feel like I understand God differently, and in a way that to me makes me closer to God than when I was younger and sort of being told what to believe about God and how to worship God and identify in theistically. So yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. There was so much richness there to explore, and I think it's really beautiful that we have this concept in Judaism that when someone does convert, when someone becomes Jewish, that their soul was always Jewish. Mm-hmm, yeah. It was just waiting to find its full expression in that fully expressed person. And I'd love to explore a little bit more. You talked just at the end about how your various identities all make their way into your work, but specifically your Jewish identity and its connection to theater and animation and art. We spoke a few months ago with Teddy Abrams, who talked a lot about, for him, how his Judaism was very informed by kind of the legacy of orchestral music. But for you, it almost feels like it's more about putting your Judaism into artistic expression.
Yeah.
And I'd love to hear a little bit more about what that process is like and what that looks like for you. What does it mean for your Jewishness to come out in that artistic way?
It's super easy because
you're such a talented artist.
Not like it just flows. It's super easy to incorporate all of my intersectionality into my work because it's so prevalent every single day. Especially as a Black Jew, I am the only mitzvah-aged Black Jewish male in my congregation, and usually I'm the only one that's there for a service or things. So when I walk in, it's those sort of, it's not, and sort of, I was talking to my cantor recently about how microaggressions against me and the assumption that, it's that I'm Jewish because that I'm a convert to Judaism because I'm Black which it sucks because it's true, but it's but the assumption is racist, and it's an assumption that's made by a lot of people that they wouldn't have made if my skin were white, and so dealing with the otherness that sort of being a minority in a minority it's just always a part of my life and just my navigating being alive every single day. And so it's one of those things where, people have asked me, when they find out that I'm Jewish, and literally would say, oh, so you converted because of your husband? And it's just absolutely not, why would you say that? You have no idea, and to me, it's, and there are people, nothing against people who do, convert for their family unity, and all that. But for me, that was one of my, this person whoever I end up with has to be Jewish. I had standards, I had things that I wanted, and my Judaism was not derivative of someone else's, and so that's the kind of thing that happens so often. I get people who find out that I'm Jewish and say, "Oh, you don't look Jewish to me," and I know exactly what they mean, and so that's a part of my life, and so that's what I write about, and that's what inspires me to deal with in the content that I create, et cetera. And I also look for those areas, for underrepresented voices in Judaism. I did an animated Purim short a few years ago called Live Work Purim, and to me it was a way to put queerness into the Purim story, and it was sort of you
don't have to work so hard to put queerness into the Purim story.
This is true. But I said let's do this. I said let's assume that maybe one of the eunuchs was a total queen and a diva and it was gonna get the girls together for this parade in front of Ahasuerus. So anyway, it was just very fun and just really making sure that there's always this representation. The last play that we did for Shema was a play called Egypt Land, and it dealt with what Passover would have been like at a Southern Jewish family who owned slaves, and what the conversation would be like, during Pesach, because of the fact that, that's got to be the elephant in the room, during that. And so those and that came from researching even, Jewish families in Louisville and in the South, and that it was sort of loosely based on things that actually happened, that kind of thing. And so these are things that are important to me. These are things that affect me. And so they make their way always into my work. And even if there are ways in which, like we did Just a Second a few years ago, and then I, cast Bob as a Black man and just didn't try to explain anything about it's just I specifically wanted to make sure that it was an integrated cast for the purpose of just the representation, so that there's it doesn't say Bob is a Black character, and usually in theater, unless a character is specifically called to be Black, the assumption is that a character is white. And so it's just one of those things where these are the things that are important to me and that affect me on a daily basis, so they always make their way into my work.
You mentioned Pesach and sort of the elephant in the room. And curious, as a Black Jew, as a queer person, how do you come into that holiday? How do you think about, the Jewish people sort of emerging and being redeemed from slavery? How do you tell that story, and what do your seders look like?
Our seders always look like whatever the person that we're visiting is doing, because we always hit other people up. We have to stop that because we have a daughter now, my husband and I, and we have to make our own Pesach and not sort of mooch off of everyone else's traditions and build our own. But that is something that very much we have a Haggadah that is for that deals with queerness, and we and fortunately for me, especially with the Jewish community in Louisville specifically, whether it's KI or Adass Jeshurun, the people are all so conscious of things like this, and so even when we visit others and we're at someone else's house and we're doing first or second night and they're bringing up these issues and they're using Haggadahs that delve into this kind of material, just the inclusiveness that I find which is one of the reasons why it was so refreshing to come to Louisville, because this is the kind of Judaism that I find here, as opposed to I just don't know the Jewish community in Atlanta, but that was one where I did not feel included, and I didn't know how to get included and involved. But here, it's just everywhere. We have so many Jews who are so interested in social justice and so interested in representation, and it's just a huge focus. And so I find that those things get touched on and delved into. But for me, especially Pesach, it is a time where I think about slavery, and I think about the coming out of slavery and what it means to say, that to really have this idea that we're all kind of like literally doing this, even though it's historical observance and all of that. And so it's all prevalent for me, especially for, again, being a Black Jew, being a Black queer Jew, being a Black queer left-handed Jew means that I experienced otherness very, very significantly. And so a minority and a minority and a minority. And so because of that, those things are always very prevalent in my mind. And I'm mindful of how those things, interact. Even like things like Kristallnacht, and thinking about when we observe that, and thinking about the fact that a lot of the Nazi laws on trying to other the Jews were based off of templates that they had from Southern Jim Crow laws, and so how integrated all of this is, and how that mentality just kind of it's so integrated, and then so I just feel like I never observe Pesach without thinking about those things and how they affect me, and how my queerness is how I identify as a queer person in the context of Pesach, and how I identify as a Black person in context of Pesach, and all those things together, that intersectionality and then all of that. So it's very, very prevalent. It's always there.
Yeah. My wife would really appreciate that you touched on left-handedness as also an othered minority status. But one of the things that really touched me with what you were just saying is that, you've been going to other people's seders, which is amazing. And I think really just a huge part of what I'm hearing from your story is the importance of individuals being nice to you. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that no matter what community you're in, it's very true in the Jewish community, but when you see someone who you might think of as other, who you're not sure if they're there, that you can lead with a posture of welcoming or with a posture of, fear. Yeah. And especially as Jews, because we have things to fear, we sometimes lead with that posture of, I don't know who this person is, and so I'm not going to be as welcoming. But just the simple act of welcoming is really what made the difference. And it wasn't even from a rabbi, and it wasn't from that. It was just from the Jews in the pews, as we like to say. And so I think it's so great that you found that welcoming and that community here. What I was hearing, though, is that you've been going to other people's seders. Now you said because you have kids that you're going to be thinking about your own. And I know you're raising 2 Black Jewish kids, and how does that they're not people who, you said there's kind of the microaggression too of assuming that you converted, but it's not true. For them, it is true. For them, it's not going to be true. Right. And they're going to have to face some of those same things. Yeah. I know they're still pretty young, but how do you think about what it means to be raising Black Jewish kids in America today? What does that
what are some of the conversations you have with your husband, with your kids? What does that look like?
Yeah, it's a super relevant conversation because of the fact that I know I have to prepare her for the othering that my daughter is going to, especially, talking about Ophira, she is, she's going to be a woman. She's going to be black. She's going to be Jewish. She's going to have 2 dads, all of these, and she's left-handed too. I forced her to. Literally took the spoon out of her other hand and put it, said, "You're going to do this." Yeah, knowing that's coming, I feel the responsibility to prepare her and equip her to deal with that. Especially like you said, when people who assume that I'm a convert to Judaism because I'm black, they're I always say they're racist and right, but people who will assume that about my daughter will be racist and wrong. They will be making this observation, this assumption. Hopefully the world would be different when she's that age, but right now, just knowing that. And again, same thing that she deals with. She's very young, and so it just hasn't really occurred to her that she's different in a lot of ways. And so, but she is the only black kid at her Jewish day school, or not day school, but daycare. And so, just starting to formulate all those things about how that will affect her and her identity, and having her understand, along with the regular things that Jewish parents think about, as like, how will I get my kid to go to school with non-Jewish kids and not feel like jealous of Christmas, and not feel jealous of not being able to do things on Friday night and that kind of stuff, or Saturday morning, and all of that. And so it's those common things, and then there's also the added thing about how will she feel knowing that in a lot of spaces she will be the only one, and so Simon and I are doing a lot to just make sure that she has an enormous sense of self-worth and self-pride and self-understanding of who she is as a Jewish kid, and from a Jewish family, and so that is how we're kind of really preparing her to be able to take on which we can't do for her, but all we can do is prepare her and equip her for her otherness, and also for just her identity, and being able to figure out who she is and how she wants to navigate the world on her own, and to make sure that all those things, that she feels like they're a positive and not something that's a negative, or something that's deleterious to her ability to navigate life.
I want to ask you to tell us a little bit about the creation of the Shema Theater Group, and reflect a little bit on what you see the role of Jewish theater being in a place like Kentucky.
Oh, that's nice. Well, we especially in I just recently stepped off the board of the Alliance for Jewish Theater. My life is just so busy, and it's one of those things to where I have to make some decisions, but still involved with them. But that's a conversation that we would have a lot at AJT. And Jewish theater in general, especially as we in Jewish theaters we make commentary on the world around us, and on things like anti-Semitism and things just like Jewish identity and identity theater, but also just and specifically in Louisville, giving voice to what it is to be Jewish in the South, Jewish in I know we're getting there, but Kentucky's still technically the South, and also, to be honest, because of the fact that I was not raised here, just going on just about 11 years here now, really not being able to sort of speak for what it is to be, historically Jewish in Kentucky. I just know what my experience has been since I've been here, and my husband was raised here, and his experience and all of that. And so, but I feel like it's super important. I think it's super important because of visibility, and that people, often get Jews are still largely stereotyped, and Jews are still, people think that they know, but there's so much diversity in Judaism, whether, not just, conservative and reform and Orthodox and all of that, but just, the different levels of what people believe, and secular Judaism and all of that, but keeping its identity strong, and keeping being able to tell our stories ourselves. And so that's what's super important about theater, is that the stories can be told about us, as opposed to, and we can be sort of just relegated to being, side stories or just kind of auxiliary to someone else's experience or someone else's story, but making those stories our stories and telling them ourselves and all of that, and just not getting sort of lost in just taking control of the narrative and what's important to us as Jews. And so for again, going back to myself and just what's important to me, it's theology. I am theistic. I do believe in God, and I believe in God Jewishly, and I love Jewish observance. I love Jewish tradition. I love Jewish liturgy. I do miss, I miss terribly, gospel music. It's something that's not a part of my regular life anymore. And it's one, and I anybody who sits next to me in shul, they'll hear it coming out. Shema Israel. And so it's
have more of that.
it's there. I remember the last time I was to read Torah in shul, I asked Cantor, I said, do we always have to just say Amen when we start? It's like, can I go Amen and then start my portion? She's like, yeah, you can go to town on Amen. And so, but yeah. So I just think that theater is such a way that people accept and people understand and people see very quickly in theater, because you're showing them and you're connecting to them emotionally, as opposed to, and very stylistically, as opposed to the white noise that's kind of and the sort of the binary conversations that kind of happen in social media and in the world, and we've lost the ability to discuss things, and to agree to differ and all that stuff. But when you see things being acted out, and you see theater as a place that you can really connect to people and sort of disarm them and let them engage what you have to say, and that's really what we, why we chose Shema as the name, to hear us. We have something to say, and so that's definitely the impetus behind starting Shema, because there's actually, Louisville's an amazing theater city. There's so much theater going on. I've acted even with like Pandora and Drag Daddy. And the center stage, and there's just so much theater going on here all the time. But for me, Jewish theater is super important as a way to, again, approach people with these ideas and these thoughts. And even now, when you're thinking about, the Israeli Hamas conflict and so much that's going on, and the the government in Israel, and how the topic of is dissenting against a government equate with anti-Semitism, and speaking out and that kind of thing, and there's so many different opinions about that even within Judaism, and being able to use theater as a way to express those ideas, and it doesn't have to be like analogous one-to-one about this situation, because it's so applicable to so many other situations and things. And so to me, as a creative, it's just it's a great canvas to approach these things and to tackle these things. And to me, that's what it's about. I mean, you can even you can entertain, and you can just sort of entertain, for the purpose of entertainment. But for me, identity theater means that the purpose of why we're engaging in theater is to make a statement, and it's to bring up ideas and just provoke conversation. And that's what, to me, is just a great thing about theater, as opposed to other means of communication, creative communication. Yeah.
Do you feel that Jewish theater, and particularly the Shema Theater Group, has opened up maybe opportunities for dialogue or deeper connection with the non-Jewish community in Louisville?
Absolutely. The last play that we did, no one was Jewish in the cast but myself. Yeah. So the idea that, especially for we do exclusively Jewish content with Shema, but we encourage others who are outside of that expression to be a part of it, but whether it's their directing or acting or being a part of crew, etc. And even to the point to where, and especially because I try to do things that also really focus on women and minorities as content. And so I remember it's so funny, the demographics are so crazy, because like the last play that we did at a predominantly white shul, predominantly white synagogue, we had a predominantly black cast, and so for the show, and it was about Judaism. It was about and it's I find it does expose Jewish culture to people who would never otherwise really have an intimate understanding of it. And so in that sort of mission part of it, I think it's very successful, and it has really started dialogue. And even in the course of productions, we talk about what things mean and what it would have meant, especially if we're doing something that's period. What it would have been like, that kind of a thing. We and it was kind of a reverse conversation with A Satisfied Mind, which was the show that we did recently, and it was about it was a lot of I always like I write what I know, but it was about a white Jewish businessman in the 1940s Atlanta, and his relationship with his like Holy Roland, like Kojic Church of God in Christ. Domestic and how they butted heads all the time because of her relentless desire to convert him, and so those kinds of things. But yet, again, there was no one who was Jewish in the cast but myself, and I had like a bit role. I played like a burglar who like had like 3 minutes on stage. But yeah, having those conversations and them doing that work is always great. And then and we always it's so funny when this guy named actor, he's an amazing actor, Jake Minton, and he had the role of Mr. Abrams, and he had to learn to speak in Yiddish, and he just really couldn't get it. So right when he's supposed to be mumbling under his breath anyway, and so he just kind of like really just leaned into the mumbling part of it whenever he came on stage and he had to do that, and he was like, boy, LV, and he just really kind of like mumbled his way through it, and then it made it funny because then the punchline was like where one of the maids says, what is he saying, and Miss Elliott says, I don't know, but I think he be cussing. And so it's just one of those things where he just kind of like lent it to it. But even Jake, meeting with Cantor and going over the Yiddish and the Hebrew that happens and learning prayers, learning in Egypt land. The actor had to, literally learn how to do the Shabbat prayers and things like that. And so it's one of those things where I love exposing people to that who normally just would not have that sort of intimate. And I remember how ignorant I was of Judaism growing up as a Christian. Like to me, it just seems like I was like, because so much of the stuff that I learned then, I go like, oh, that's why Christians do that, and that's what, and realize how derivative Christianity is of it. But you would think that wouldn't just be such a holy, us and them kind of a thing. But there's so much that to be learned from people who are adjacent to Judaism because of Christianity, but yet they just never made those connections. And so I love the interchange that happens when people come in who are not Jewish to participate in a Shema show, and they come away with an understanding of things that they just otherwise would probably never really have any proximity to. Mm-hmm. Yeah, an understanding of.
I want to go back a little bit, but it also connects to what you were just saying. You were talking about gospel music, and because you were talking about gospel music, and then also we have Passover now, there's this moment that a lot of people have at their Seders, that at my Seder growing up, we always at a certain point would all sing a gospel song. Mm. And you have all of these mostly white Jewish people sitting around the table saying, when Israel was in Egypt's land. And it was something that we never really, thought about, like, is this appropriate for us to be singing? It was just like, this is a story, this is a song about the story of the Exodus, so we sing it at the Seder, which is about the story of the Exodus. And you were just talking about bringing non-Jews into a Jewish experience. I don't think that Jews singing one gospel song is bringing us in any way into a black experience, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, because I think recently a lot of Seders have started to question whether or not we should be singing that song. And I'm curious for you, and again, not asking you to speak for all black people or all black Jews, but for you personally, have you been at Seders where that song has been sung? How does it feel for you? How does that resonate? What are your thoughts about mostly or even all non-black Seders leaning into that music in that moment?
That's a very good question. I think selfishly, I miss singing gospel music so much in a sort of a corporate setting that I always embrace it. Like, yeah, that's great, let's sing it. And then I'll throw my heart into it. I'll go to town on, let my people know. But I just see so much intersection between, especially in America, the history of African Americans and the history of Jews, and not to even try to equate them, but they're so intersectional that to me it's appropriate. To me, it makes sense. I think if you're mindful of it, it makes it even better because of the fact that But even those songs were songs that enslaved persons got from white Christianity and used and we're singing, and so the sort of the back and forth, the exchange, and of course, gospel music was born out of African music and all of that, and then henceforth comes everything else, and country and and soul and rock and roll and all that stuff. And so our truly indigenous music, outside of the indigenous people, the truly American music being gospel music, and which led to the blues and all that. But I see it as appropriate in that it is inclusive of it brings with it the history, all of that was a time where people were it tells a story. It tells an absolute story, and we always say, whether or not it's appropriation. I think that conversation comes in when people are trying to benefit from something without an understanding of, and with a disregard to sort of the pain and the suffering and the social aspect that other people can't sort of put on and take off, and so I think that for me, singing, Go Down Moses, is both. It feels inclusive to me in a way, and I know a lot of people aren't really. They're just sort of thinking that this is content-wise appropriate song, but for me, it gives some inclusivity of those two experiences. And so, as someone who has that lives at that intersection of being Black and being African American and being Jewish, that song's amazing for me. And so, I love that when people sing that, and it's great. We had an instance once when we were, I can't remember when we were doing. What part of the service? It's at the very end. The name is escaping me right now.
I don't know.
And we were, and they were going to do it in the tone of my old Kentucky home, because it was like the Shabbat that was closest to Derby.
Yeah.
And our cantor asked me how I would feel about it, and I did say, I'm not going to detract from you all's experience. You guys, especially like I said, I'm not from Kentucky, and so I'm not going to be diehard about it, but I probably won't sing it. And I was like, there's some problematic terms, history behind the song and some of the omitted verses. And so he decided not to do it out of, and I derailed it for everybody, but there are sensitivities to things that I think for me, they are things that wouldn't be other people wouldn't have those sensitivities because they just don't affect them in that way. And so I think I love having a cantor who thought enough to and was thoughtful enough to come to me and go like, hey, I know there's some issues with that song, especially for African American people and all of that. Would this be an issue if we were to sing a Denalam to this tune for Derby? And it was just a frank conversation. And but that's what I love. Again, we could come full circle to how amazingly inclusive and welcoming Jews in Louisville are, and especially for someone who is not from here, it's just absolutely amazing and refreshing. And this is just where I want to be. And if you had told me 12 years ago I'd end up in Louisville, Kentucky for the rest of my life, raising a family and living my life, I would have said, like, you're crazy. There's absolutely no way I'm going to go to, Kentucky Fried Chicken and all that stuff. And, but it's, it cut to, 11 years later, I live here. I'm raising my family here, living a very wonderful Jewish life here, a religious marriage ceremony on a steamboat in the middle of the Ohio River where I got married. Just like it was so great. It was like we had Havdalah like as the sun was going down, and once the sun was done and we get done with Havdalah, we had the wedding ceremony on a what is that, paddle boat. And I was like, this doesn't get any more Mark Twain than this. I'm definitely in the South right now. But yeah, it's truly it's amazing to be here. I would be here I don't think I would have ever come here by choice, but I think it was the best thing that ever happened to me as far as like where I would end up living and the people I would meet and the life that I would live, and how this is where God wanted me to be to express this, just Judaism here. I wouldn't do it anywhere else. It's amazing.
We got to cut that last bit, send it to, the Kentucky, I don't know, government that encourages people to move here.
Board of Tourism.
Board of Tourism, exactly, yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to just pick up on sort of a thread that I'm hearing in what you're sharing, Yehuda, so beautifully, which is that in addition to all of our identities being so complex and multi-layered, and particularly yours, that there's also maybe a bit of homesickness for the identity that you maybe didn't fully leave behind, but the Christian identity and the gospel music and different points of, or different opportunities for different ways of worship and particularly song. And this is something that comes up a lot in conversations with conversion students. How much of my old self am I allowed to bring into my Jewish identity? And it's just hearing you talk, it's such a beautiful reminder that we should actually embrace all parts of our identities, even if we've made a pretty significant shift in our lives, religiously and spiritually and socially. So I'm just thinking about that, and that also feels sort of essentially Jewish, and especially on Passover, to be homesick, to be yearning, to be sort of embracing nostalgia, even if it can potentially bring up some maybe painful or challenging ideas or memories. So I'm thinking about that, and I'm grateful for you sort of speaking so beautifully to that truth about what it means to just be a human being.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would even say that one of the things about gospel music that I love so much is how liturgical it is. And so it's like so appropriate sometimes in something like Pesach and thinking about, oppression and things like that those kinds of things are there. I often, like when I'm working, I'll sing gospel songs, and I always look. There's so many different ones that like are just like about God, and so I just pretend like it's a generic spiritual song, and so it just says God, like doesn't say Jesus or this, that, and the other, and so it's like but it's I definitely am, and I thank you for commenting on that. There is a sense of homesickness for all of that the cultural stuff, and again, I don't feel like I just throw it away. There is some, I would say, emotional trauma from growing up in a tradition where I would feel like there's a little bit of indoctrinal sort of tyrannical behavior going on, as far as like you have to believe this and you're not allowed to believe anything else. You're not allowed to question and all that. And so I know there's a lot of people in that world, they call it church hurt, who are church hurt and have some of that. And who grow up feeling othered and not welcome in their own space. But yeah, I embrace the things that still bring me joy, and the feeling of those things are still there. Because and again, like I said, I don't feel like I changed to God. I feel like I understand God differently, and relate to God differently. And so I definitely try to bring in as much of that as, which is interesting. It's kind of what we say in theater too. You want to bring into your character as much of yourself as is appropriate to the role, and you want to get rid of as much of yourself as is not appropriate to the role. And so same thing for Judaism, for my expression, and whether it's any of that, bringing as much as is appropriate to me, just to feel like it's not sort of encroaching on my identity as a Jewish person, and so those things are still special to me and nostalgic to me. As much as we try to shield my daughter from Christmas, when we're driving through Louisville, we're like, look at those beautiful Hanukkah lights, that's what we tell her. And so, but
amazing how many people celebrate
so
Hanukkah,
many.
right?
Oh my gosh. And so, we tell her that Santa is Hanukkah Harry's brother, all these things. And so, it's one of those things where I really, there's a sense of nostalgia and sort of homesickness for it, as well as the fact that the rest of my family are still practicing Christians and evangelicals and that kind of a thing. And so you go home and it's not awkward, but it's just there's just it's very different, and it's one of those things where you even miss the ability to relate to people in the way that how you no longer have that in common with them, and though my mother's making great strides at making sure that when she does watch my daughter that she knows the dietary restrictions and all that stuff, and she's really making an effort. But yeah, so that's something that I haven't really thought about like formally, but how much I miss it in a way. Not that I desire to go back, but just that I miss it. And so thank you for bringing that up. I feel like oh man, that's ouch, yeah, in my heart. I do miss it a lot, and I don't think I've really been in a space to ever admit that. I miss it a lot. Yeah.
So from looking back and the nostalgia to just a little bit of looking forward.
Yeah.
What are you working on right now? What are we excited about? You have so many projects and so many things that you're juggling. What are you excited about right now? What's getting you going Jewishly, artistically? What's the next big thing?
It's always super exciting what we're planning. One of the things that I'm the most excited about that we haven't really been able to move forward with yet because we're still waiting for the right to do it to come in, but is to explore to do to mount a production of Porgy and Bess. With Shema and with Roots 101. I was going to be a co-production where it's super hard to get the rights to it, and so we're kind of like waiting. We tentatively have the idea of doing it after High Holy Days and before Hanukkah in that space at the end of the year if the rights do come in, and if not, then do it and doing it in the next season and that kind of thing. And so, but just the exploration of and even talking about Jewishness in sort of black spaces and the Gershwins and all of that. And so I think it's super exciting to explore that and to sort of have those community conversations leading up to that production. And so that's something that we have on the books, and we've applied and we're waiting here, and it's notoriously slow to get rights to do that. I think a family trust that deals with that, and we've been told that it can take a very long time to get those rights. But in the meantime, I've also just finished writing a rock opera on the life of Jonah, and so mounting that is going to be interesting. I've never done so, and I've written a lot of theater in my life, but never a rock opera. And so it's like 22 original songs that tell the story of Jonah. It's called Jonah and the really, 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 really big fish. So 5 reallys, and so that's super exciting because it's just going to be very colorful and very fun and it has a little bit of a message too, and so I'm super excited about those two projects as far as that Shema is looking forward to coming to taking on in the near future.
That's awesome. Yeah. Is there potentially a small walk-on role for a rabbi with no singing ability?
There's a lot of roles where people just kind of like say something in the middle of a song, So,
all right, we'll be in touch.
We'll have to figure something out for you.
And we would love to make sure that folks in Lexington also know about that production, and we can maybe plan a trip and come up and
that'd be super awesome.
See it, yeah, that would be really fun.
We don't have to wait for rights for that one. I know the author, so it's all good.
So we like to wrap up our interviews with our guests on the Bluegrass Schmooze with a lightning round.
Okay.
We ask everyone the same questions, and don't think too hard about it. Just answer sort of what's top of mind, what comes to you in the moment. So we'll start with your favorite Jewish holiday.
Pesach.
Appropriate for this month.
Yeah.
Honey cake or apples and honey on Rosh Hashanah?
I would say I like sweets, but apples and honey just I'm a texture person too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, That's a good answer.
Your best Purim costume.
You're going to have a good one.
Black Panther.
Your favorite breakfast food when Yom Kippur is over, what's the first thing you're grabbing?
In all honesty, we eat this a lot, and not just at the associated times, but matzo ball soup. It's like so good anytime.
Absolutely.
It's not just for Pesach anymore.
That's its new branding.
Yeah.
Favorite biblical character?
I want to say Jonah because I'm so close to him because of this project that we just finished doing. He's such a feisty guy. Favorite, probably King David.
Mm.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. And then Hamantaschen or Latkes.
Oh, latkes.
That
It's
is
been the universal
correct
opinion
answer.
of all of our guests.
I would even go as far as to say I don't even like Hamantaschen.
Whoa.
No, just it's too much dough and no, not for me.
Hamantaschen slander on the schmooze.
It's a very unpopular position, I'm sure. Yeah, latkes.
And then we always close up with L'chaim of the month. And your L'chaim of the month, we L'chaim al Mayim, we just have water in the studio. It's like, 11 a.m. when we're recording. But we like to offer some recognition. It could be to an organization, could be to a person, could be to anyone who you kind of just want to highlight, say thanks to, whatever it is, just someone to shed a little light on them this month with our last few minutes here on the schmooze. So I can go first this month because I actually have one that I thought about it beforehand. Last month, I caught myself off guard because I was listening to everyone else. But this month, I want to give my L'chaim of the month to my parents, Eileen and Gary Fried. This is our Passover, our Nisan bluegrass schmooze. And for me, Passover is just so tied up in the Seder. And my parents hosted Seder every year. We'd have, 20 to 30 people around the table. And as we got older, the Seder would change because it was adapted to, what the kids needed, and whether what the kids needed was just to go off and watch Rugrats Passover or to be deeply discussing, what it means to talk about slavery and freedom then and now and what does this look like. And they just do an amazing, amazing job crafting Jewish ritual in general and Seder in particular. So L'chaim to mom and dad, to Ima and Abba, to Gary and Eileen.
L'chaim. I want to give my L'chaim of the month to our baby daughter Tzipora, who just started sleeping through the night, which has been a game changer for all of us. So L'chaim to Tzipora.
L'chaim to Tzipora.
I would say, I would say, Robin and Sanford Reiches. They were the first people who really just kind of took me in and helped lead me to Judaism, and I will be forever indebted to them and grateful.
L'chaim. Thank you so much, and thanks for schmoozing with us.
Oh,
Thank you
pleasure.
so much for being with us, Yehuda. This is really, really great. And again, another awesome problem that we have on the schmooze is that we could talk for hours with each of our guests. But we're grateful for the time and the hour, and thank you so much.
It's been lovely. My pleasure.
That's it for this month of Nisan. Join us next month in ER as we learn about less ancient turning points in Jewish history.
On the Bluegrass Schmooze. The Bluegrass Schmooze is created and produced by Rabbi Shani Abramowitz and me, Rabbi Ben Fried. Our executive producer is Laura Ellis.
Production assistance from Alex Biscardi. Our opening and closing song is Jew from Kentucky, written by Dan Byrne and performed by Dan Byrne and Bridget Kalin.
Thanks to Knesset Israel Congregation in Louisville and Ohave Zion Synagogue in Lexington for believing in two young rabbis and helping us make this podcast a reality. Our show is made possible by support from the Jewish Heritage Fund. The Bluegrass Schmooze is a part of the Louisville Public Media Podcast Incubator, with support from the Eye Care Institute's Butchertown Clinical Trials.
Find us on Instagram for lots of extra content. We're at Bluegrass Schmooze. Or send us an email at schmooze@lpm.org.
To keep in touch and to learn how you can help us continue this work, visit bluegrassschmooze.org.
We're Jews from Kentucky, that's what we are. We drink our mint juleps from a kosher dill jar. Wherever we wander, wherever we roam, Jews from Kentucky is always at home. Zagazund, everybody.
Support for LPM podcasts comes from the Eye Care Institute and Butchertown Clinical Trials, where they strive for diversity, equity, and inclusion within their staff, patients, and clinical trial participants. To learn more, visit butchertown.clinic.